I'm going to go ahead and pass Marion Thatcher the presenter rights. And right now she has the presenter rights. Marion, you have rights. And we're going to go ahead and actually also unmute Marion. Here we go. And I think Marion is unmuted. Yes, you are.
Okay.
And welcome, Marion.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, and good morning, everyone. So this morning, my charge is to just catch you up on what your coaches have been doing in the Content Standards Rollout project. So that's what we're going to do today. You might remember, well, some of you, a few of you, I recognize your names, so some of you I think have been coming to the trainings, and you could probably be giving these slides. But for the rest of you, just so that you know what your coaches are doing as they're coming to these various events that are part of the Content Standards Rollout. You might remember this slide from when we talked in August about, that's just looking at kind of the overall stages of implementation of content standards. So we started with creating readiness, and we were doing that in the April meeting and in the August initial training. Just getting to understand what the content standards are and what we're going to be doing with them. The next stage was garnering support and getting people interested. And in our Texas version, this involves planning for instruction. So your coaches have been doing that. They've been training your teachers. They've been working either one-on-one with or in small groups with teachers, or training large groups, or both. And so I have a sense that quite a few teachers now are at least aware that there are new content standards and that they're going to be affecting instruction. So we're moving now into the institutionalization phase, which is like developing policies and putting policies and practices into practice that will sustain the direction that we're going. And then for the remainder of the year after February, we'll be focused on sustaining the momentum that's been built and planning for scaling up. And that's going to involve for the coaches a lot of individual observing and coaching and working with teachers. So that's where we are in the big picture. And then here's what's been happening so far and what's coming up in terms of actual events. So you were at the rollout meeting in April. Then you selected your coaches. We had an intro webinar for them in July, and then we had the 2-day training in August. And after that is the first time that I met with you to give you a heads up about what we were doing. We had a follow-up with them on September 22nd. I always have trouble clicking right on the right spot to move these slides forward. And then we had a lot of training, 6 different trainings regionally in November. So we had a pre-webinar for that. Then we had the trainings in November, and then a post-webinar for that training, which was just last Friday. And then this is the second manager's webinar, and there'll be a third one after the 1-day training that we're doing at the end of TALE on the Saturday of the TALE conference, planned right now from 8 to 2. And then we'll have I think I'm missing a webinar after that in March, a follow-up webinar for that. And then 3 wrap-up webinars. So just kind of following up, keeping track, talking a little bit more about coaching for the remaining 3 months of the project. So here's what your coaches have been doing since the last time I talked with you. In the post-webinar on September 22nd, we looked at their homework, which was to post a lesson activity related to a standard and a benchmark. We looked at what was new in the COP, and they've been very active in the community of practice on Emery, I forgot what you call that, but anyway, the online community of practice. So we looked at that, and that's where they've been posting their homework and posting questions and discussing with us and with each other. Then we talked about some coaching strategies, and then we looked at a lesson plan template. And I think at that point the gap analysis form had just been sent out from the Workforce Commission, so we just took a quick look at that. and it looked like this. And at that point, it was just, here's what it looks like, and here's how you enter your answers, not much about what the content was going to be. Then in October, we had a pre-webinar for the November training, and here's the agenda for that one. Basically just the schedule of the workshops and getting people to sign up in November, reviewing of what we had already talked about coaching, and then we talked about syllabus and curriculum and just some definitions. It seemed like in the August training we weren't all on the same page about what's included in curriculum and what goes on a syllabus, so we just looked at that. And then we introduced a lesson planning form that we're using in this project, not requiring, but just if you need one, it has all the pieces that we're talking about in this training. And then we focused on formative assessment. So these are the coaching strategies that we had talked about to this point. Being a good listener, not like immediately jumping into giving advice, but listening and reflecting where the teacher that you're coaching is at and addressing the issues that are pressing to them in that moment. And then modeling instruction, either going into someone's class and teaching a part of a lesson or having somebody come to your class. Then observing and providing feedback and how to do that in a not evaluative and not threatening, but in a collegial way, and then providing support. So this was the part about a syllabus and curriculum. Then the lesson plan form and focusing on formative assessment. So formative assessment, we talked about what it is, and then we had a list of about 10 strategies that we went through and looked at how to implement them in the classroom. Is Marion's PowerPoint going to be posted? It certainly could be posted, or we can email it to you. So I will let Beth and John decide what's the best way to do that. Okay, so that was the pre-webinar. Then they came to the training, the face-to-face training on various dates in November. And the focus of that was really lesson planning and working with teachers on planning lessons that are standards-based. So we looked at backwards design, and then more on lesson planning, and then a little bit more about starting with the objective and making sure the objective matches the standard and the assessment matches the objective and the activities match the assessment. So going through that process and getting everything aligned. And then another discussion about the gap analysis. So backwards design, as you know, is focusing, beginning with the end in mind and focusing on, first of all, what do we want our students to learn? So it doesn't start with, sometimes we think it starts with the assessment, but it actually starts with the objective. Like what are we going to do here? And that's a lot of times one of the benchmarks from the standards or a piece of a benchmark. Not everything can be covered in one lesson, but we're starting from there and making sure that at least we're somewhere in the ballpark of the standards. Then how are we going to know they learned it? So that's what the assessment's going to be. And then going to the teaching activities. And as teachers, we really tend to focus on what are we going to teach and how are we going to teach it and what are our activities going to be. So a lot of times we start with the learning activities. So this was to just focus on objective and assessment. Then we went back into lesson planning and looked at all the pieces of the lesson plan. So this list is all the pieces that are in the lesson planning template that we've been using. Looking at the lesson plan form, and then we did some activities of kind of looking at things that didn't work or didn't work well. So for example, if the objective, you have a great objective, but it's not related to the standard that you're trying to teach to, that's a problem. If your objective is vague and you don't really know what the student's going to learn, then you don't really have a way to measure that. And sometimes the assessment is not related to the objective. I think we had an example in a scenario that they read where the teacher did an assessment that was really, it looks more like he came to the end of the lesson and thought, oh, I have to have something to summarize this lesson. So he created something on the fly that wasn't really related to the lesson objective. So we want to get away from that. That happens to all of us from time to time, but that's the goal is not to plan ahead, and then making sure the assessment's related to the standard. Then they had an assignment from that. So a lot of the coaches, generally it seems like the coaches are the ones that are working on the gap analysis or leading that process or playing an important role in that process. So we have been spending some time on that. And so we were asking them to then post in the COP some answers to questions about that process. And I understand that people are in all different stages of that. So we have some people saying, some people are done, some people are in the thick of it, some people are saying, I'm still waiting for my team to meet. We're going to meet on the 15th or something like that. So we're in different places in relation to that. So this is basically what we said about it in November, that the instructions in the template were out, and that if they hadn't seen that, they could ask you, their administrator, to see that. And that the goal of this process is to get the big picture. The TWC goal, and John can correct me if I'm wrong, is to get the big picture statewide of how curriculum is being implemented across the state. And if there are gaps that are kind of general, then we can have like a strategy statewide to address that. But so it's not a critique of the program. It's not a bad thing to have gaps. It's a planning tool to look at if there are gaps, and then the next stage will be if there are, what are we going to do about that? But that's not this stage. Everything doesn't have to be fixed. This is just an analysis of where the gaps might be. And then we had a discussion about the whole process and what they're finding up to this point. So I'm moving on to the post-webinar for November trainings, which was just last Friday. And in that webinar, I kind of reflected back what's been being posted in the COP on the gap analysis, and then we had a check-in about backwards design and did another little activity related to that. And then we looked at rubrics, which is part of creating good formative assessments. You need some way to know if the student is competent, it has mastery of that objective or not. So we looked at how to create a rubric. And these are just comments from the COP in case you don't have a chance to go in there and look at what people are saying. So this was a common kind of reflection of people that have been working on this to say, it was a good process for me to look at our curriculum and to see that we're doing some things really well, but maybe there actually are some things that we thought we were covering, but we're not covering them. When we actually look at the standards, it's not as complete as we were thinking it was. So that's a good outcome of the process. This is another one that gave me the opportunity to dig deeply into the resources. So this is a program that had created curriculum guides and now is looking to see if how well do the curriculum guides match the standards. This one is an individual teacher point of view, saying she uses 1 or 2 textbooks and she fills in with other resources that she finds, but looking at the whole content standards picture, she sees that she needs more resources than she has right now. And this is one of the things that I really appreciate about this process, that is it's giving teachers a bigger, especially teachers and instructional leaders and program coordinators, the bigger picture of where we are with curriculum and with implementation, and that it's not just my classroom, it's not just my program, it's, oh, look, statewide we have a need in the area of financial literacy. We really aren't doing that. Or some programs might be doing that really well, but some haven't even thought about that. So the ability to share across regions and across programs has been important, and I've seen a lot of growth there. And of course, then realizing that there's not one book that covers everything. So we are going to have to look at a variety of resources. And just looking at what they've posted so far about the gaps, in ELA, the most common one was about research, and different strategies for doing research that could be strengthened in math. The most commonly mentioned one was financial literacy, and in ESL it was writing, and especially at the higher levels, but at every level, curriculum that addresses writing skills. And this is important as you know, as we increase rigor in instruction and look at transitions to jobs or better jobs or more training or more education. This is going to be very important. And then their last question was, what do you need? And so people were talking about the regional cooperation and communication between programs, which this project has provided the opportunity to have, which I think is great. And then, of course, time and resources. That's what we always need for everything. And the definition of resources, there were some questions about is just our textbook a resource, or our websites that we visit resources? And pretty much the answer to that has been all of those things. Whatever you use in your teaching, those are your resources. And then we looked at rubrics, and we did an activity with rubrics. We talked about why they're important, how to implement them, and also how to engage students in actually using them with each other or even creating rubrics at the higher levels. And that it's important to give students the feedback on how they're doing, what they've mastered, what they still need to work on. Their assignment right now that's due in January is to use the rubric template, which is posted on the COP, and there's also a sample posted there to post their own rubric based on a standard benchmark. So they have a lesson objective that's related to a standard, and then they have an assessment in the rubric that goes with that assessment. And we did talk about some websites where you can create a rubric, you know, sort of the quick and dirty way to do it and just download it. And so I showed a couple of those, but there's a lot of those. So if anybody has their favorite, they're going to be posting that as well. So that's where we are right now. The next time we'll be meeting with the coaches is the webinar on January 26th. So the gap analysis will be done at that point, and we'll be moving on from there and using that information. We'll have a training day, as I mentioned, on Saturday, and then the follow-up webinar, and then 3 more webinars as we go through the spring, and your coaches are working with individual teachers and small groups of teachers and making sure that teachers understand what the process of creating lesson plans related to standards is, and that they have support in doing that. In February, we'll start off with a roundtable about kind of the results of the gap analysis, so I'm hoping that they can bring their gap analysis to that meeting, and we'll divide up by program area and by specific, I guess, gap topics within each program area, and share what resources we found, so that people will come out of that with a list of resources for each one of those that we'll be able to share. And then we're going to really focus on coaching strategies and classroom observation, and especially effective feedback and how to do that, watching some videos, using the observation forms, and practicing with that. So I think you're all caught up. That was the whirlwind tour. If you have any questions, I'm looking in the chat.
There have been no questions, Marion, that have come in so far, but people may be typing as we speak, so we will see.
Well, either I was so thorough that you understand everything that happened, or I was so boring that you fell asleep, and now you're ready to move on to the rest of your day.
I think we can keep going, and if there's questions, I will let you know.
Okay, well, that's all I have. That covers what we've done up to now and where we're going in the future. So good. I'm glad you have a good grasp of what your coaches are doing, and if there's no questions, Not sleeping, just thinking. Thank you, Risa.
Okay, well, I think, Marion, thank you so very much. I think that we'll just see if there's any other questions, but I want to thank you so much for updating us on all the hard work that the instructional coaches have been doing. They have been doing a tremendous job and a tremendous amount of work, and I want to thank everybody for that because the coaches have been working very hard.
Yes, they have. They're doing a lot, and I really appreciate their participation in the face-to-face and in the webinars. They've been great, and in the COP, there's been a lot of posting there, and especially these gap analysis posts have been really interesting to read and to kind of see the commonalities and certain things that are unique to different situations. So thank you for sharing them with us.
And I also wanted to just remind everybody too, thanks Christy for asking the question about the PowerPoint. We'll get that posted in the Community of Practice, the Content Standards Rollout Community of Practice very soon, and it will be in the News You Can Use folder. So if there are no other questions, okay. We do have one comment, and this is from Christy. As a director, it has been a challenge finding enough money to support. Um, okay, so she just said that we'll send that question on. So are there any other questions? Okay, I don't think there are. I just want to thank everybody for their participation today, all the directors, and Marianne, thank you so much. And everybody have a good rest of the Thursday and a wonderful weekend and happy holidays. And I'll stay on for just a few minutes to see if there's other questions. Take care, everybody.
Thank you, Anne Marie, and thank you, everyone.